Dann begrüße ich Sie sehr herzlich zu diesem ersten Webinar einer Webinarserie der Deutschen UNESCO-Kommission zum Thema Open Science, Kulturwandel in der Wissenschaft. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir Ihr Interesse gefunden haben. Wir werden in den nächsten 10 Tagen 6-mal mittags um die jeweils gleiche Zeit über verschiedene Open Science Ansätze wie Open Access, Open Data, internationale Zusammenarbeit diskutieren. Und dabei wird es immer auch um die derzeit laufende Erarbeitung der UNESCO-Empfehlung zu Open Science gehen. Welchen Mehrwert sie für Deutschland, welchen Mehrwert sie für die Welt leisten kann und wie man sich auch an dieser Erarbeitung beteiligen kann. Dieses erste Webinar führen wir anders als die folgenden in Englisch großteils durch, weil wir 2 internationale Referenten gewinnen konnten, die wir gleich vorstellen werden. Und deswegen machen wir die Einführung auch kurz auf Englisch.
Yes, very warm welcome from our side. We are very happy that you are here and that you are interested in the topic of open science. This webinar, unlike the rest of our webinar sessions, will be largely held in English. So we'll have a brief introduction in English and in German. This webinar series is entitled Open Science, Cultural Change in Science, and it's hosted by the German Commission for UNESCO. So we will have webinar sessions for 6 times over the next 10 days. So it's a very quick webinar series at the same time each day. And we will discuss different open science topics, such as open access, open data, and international cooperation, such as others. We will also focus on the current work of the UNESCO on the topic of open science and especially on the work on the open science recommendation and also about the added value that it can bring to Germany and German open science actors. And we would also like to encourage you to be an active part and to participate in the drafting of the open science recommendation.
Ich stelle uns noch mal ganz kurz vor hier bei den Moderatoren und Facilitatoren. Die Kollegin, die gerade gesprochen hat, ist Denise Schlichting, hier auch von der Deutschen UNESCO-Kommission. Sie wird den englischen Teil moderieren. Nadine Thunecke wird danach bei der Moderation ihrer Fragen Sie dann jeweils noch mal aufrufen. Sie arbeitet auch für die Deutsche UNESCO-Kommission in unserem Team für Bildung für nachhaltige Entwicklung. Mein Name ist Lutz Möller, ich bin der stellvertretende Generalsekretär der Deutschen UNESCO-Kommission.
So very warm welcome from our side again to all listeners. We very much appreciate that you're here and we would just shortly like to introduce ourselves. So I'm Denise Schlichting, I'm working for the German Commission for UNESCO. I will assist Mr. Lutz Möller, who is Deputy Secretary General of the German Commission for UNESCO and who will host this webinar. And we also have our colleague Nadine Thunecke here. She will be active in the technical part of the webinar, and she will also contact you if we pick you to pose your question for the question round.
Ein paar wichtige Fragen ganz am Anfang natürlich immer zum Thema Datenschutz. Wir organisieren dieses Webinar über Zoom. Das haben Sie ja gemerkt bei der Registrierung. Alle Informationen zum Datenschutz finden Sie auf unserer Datenschutzerklärung auf unesco.de. Wir zeichnen dieses Webinar auf. Die Aufzeichnung läuft bereits und die wird im Anschluss auch auf YouTube zur Verfügung gestellt werden. Die Namen von Ihnen als Zuhörerinnen und Zuhörer werden dabei nicht transparent, außer Sie stellen eine Frage. Wenn Sie beim Stellen einer Frage anonym bleiben wollen, können Sie gerne Ihren Namen ändern bzw. auf anonym stellen oder uns einen entsprechenden Hinweis geben. Die Zoom-Profis unter Ihnen wissen, dass es bei Zoom ein Frage- und Antwort-Tool gibt. Wir haben uns heute entschieden, dieses nicht zu nutzen und bitten Sie, Ihre Fragen, die Sie gerne auch schon während der ersten Inputs stellen können, über die Chat-Funktion von Zoom zu stellen. Wir werden sie notieren und anschließend dann Sie einladen dazu, diese Fragen persönlich zu stellen. Falls Sie das nicht wünschen, können wir Fragen auch vorlesen. Verständnisfragen direkt zu Inputs werden wir direkt nach dem Input beantworten und andere werden wir womöglich erst für die zweite Hälfte der Fragerunden aufsparen. Falls Sie technische Probleme haben, heben Sie bitte Ihre virtuelle Hand. Das ist eine Funktion, die finden Sie auch unten bei den Zoom-Funktionen. Dann werden wir Kontakt mit Ihnen aufnehmen. Und falls Sie noch neu bei Zoom sind, wissen Sie vielleicht noch nicht so ganz, Sie können verschiedene Einstellungen wählen. Gerade in der ersten Hälfte des Webinars werden wir 2 Präsentationen sehen, denen sind Sie dann eingeblendet, wie gerade jetzt eben die Themengrafik dieses Webinars, zusätzlich rechts oben den Sprecher. Die Ansicht empfehlen wir. Wenn wir in der zweiten Webinarhälfte diskutieren, können Sie entweder den Sprecher auf groß stellen und alle anderen klein oder alle Referenten gleich groß. Das ist Ihnen überlassen. Diese Einstellung können Sie rechts oben verändern.
So as you all can see, this webinar is organized via Zoom. You can find our relevant information on data protection on our website, unesco.de, and also our privacy policy statement. For you, important to know is that this webinar will be recorded, it will be live streamed on YouTube, and it will also be available on YouTube afterwards. The names of you as listeners as such will not become transparent for as long as you don't ask a question. If you would like to remain anonymous and ask a question, you can change your name or set it to anonymous. So for asking questions during the webinar, there might be some Zoom professionals under you already. You will know that there's a question and answer tool. For today, we decided not to use this tool. So please, if you have a question, ask it in the chat. You can also contact me directly and ask you a question in the chat, and I will kind of be responsible for the chat and for picking the questions. So toward the end of the webinar, we have about 50 minutes to discuss and to ask questions. You can ask your questions all the time during the webinar, and I will pick the questions and contact you if we have picked you to pose your question. We would be very happy if you could ask the question yourself, so my colleague will then activate your microphone. If you don't feel comfortable asking the question, we can also read it out, so just please contact me. If there are any technical problems, please raise your virtual hand, the blue hand you can see on the right side, and then we will contact you and try to solve this issue. Some points on how to view this webinar. We will see 2 presentations in the first half of the webinar, and you will see the slides enlarged, as you can see the screen right now. And you will be able to see the speaker in the upper right-hand corner in small. So we recommend this view to see the presentation. When we have a discussion without slides in the second half of the webinar, you can either see the speaker in large and all others in small, or see all of us in the same size. So you can change this setting in the upper right-hand corner.
Dann kommen wir jetzt endlich auch zu den Referenten und der Referentin des heutigen Webinars. Ich freue mich sehr, Ihnen Dr. Anna Persic vorzustellen. Sie arbeitet bei der UNESCO in Paris und ist dort zuständig für die Koordinierung der Erarbeitung der UNESCO-Empfehlung zu Open Science. Sie hat davor auch für die UNESCO in New York gearbeitet, für das Man in Biosphere-Programm der UNESCO. Außerdem freuen wir uns, Ihnen Dick Bourgeois-Doyle vorzustellen, den früheren Generalsekretär des National Research Council of Canada und dem Vorsitzenden des Path to Integrity Advisory Boards. Zudem begrüßt sie alle gleich im Anschluss Pia Seidel vom BMBF, vom Bundesministerium für Bildung und Forschung. Sie arbeitet dort im Grundsatzreferat der internationalen Abteilung.
So this finally brings us to the speakers of today's webinar. We are very glad to introduce you to Dr. Anna Persic of UNESCO Paris. She is responsible for coordinating the development of the UNESCO recommendation on open science. She previously worked for the UNESCO in the New York office and also for the UNESCO Man and Biosphere program. And of course, we are also very pleased to introduce you to Dick Bourgeois-Doyle. He's former Secretary General of the National Research Council of Canada and Chairman of the Path to Integrity Advisory Board. He has worked at the National Research Council of Canada for more than 3 decades. He is also a science writer and innovation historian. But first, we are also very glad to introduce to you Pia Seidel from the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. She will provide some welcoming remarks for this webinar. She works in the policy unit of the International Department of BMBF. So I'm very happy to welcome you now, Ms. Seidel, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank. Herzlichen Dank an die Deutsche UNESCO-Kommission für die Einladung. And I'm also switching to English as to include everybody Yeah, as was already said, my name is Pia Seidel. I work in the Directorate General for International Cooperation at BMBF, so the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And in my division, we are responsible for multilateral cooperation, so also for any questions related to UNESCO. The BMBF supports the further development of open science. This is an important topic to us. And at BMBF, there is quite a number of divisions and of colleagues responsible for open science, because as you all know, and as the number of webinars shows us, there are many different aspects of open science that we can all work on. There are questions regarding open access. We've got the strategy on open access from BMBF, which was published a few years ago. Another aspect is the participation of citizens in science, as well as, for example, science communication. If you're interested, I can share some links to the work of BMBF and to the strategies within the chat later. And yeah, at the moment, with the rapid spread of COVID-19 and its unprecedented speed of research, we see again that the free exchange of knowledge is vital. And real open science, of course, does not and should not know any borders. So therefore, we welcome the initiative by UNESCO to set global standards for open science with the planned recommendation. And I would like to thank the German Commission for UNESCO for the coordination of this important process in Germany. And yeah, as part of this, initiating this series of webinars. And I'm very much looking forward to the inputs and to the discussion. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Pia Seidel. Damit kommen wir der ersten Präsentation von Anna Persic, und ab jetzt sprechen wir dann auch nur noch Englisch, das heißt auch ich werde nur noch Englisch sprechen. Anna Persic, we're very happy to have you with us, and I would like to invite you now to present to you what UNESCO is currently doing, what you are planning to do in the future, and what the general vision of UNESCO is as regards open science.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm very much happy to be here with you and be part of this very interesting webinar. And I'm also very much looking forward to getting a little bit of a feedback from the other series of your webinars that you will be holding during this week. In the introductions, I think Mr. Muller said that I'm responsible for the coordinating the UNESCO recommendation. Actually, it is a lot of people who are responsible for that. The UNESCO Natural Sciences sector is actually the one who is in the coordination role with the Assistant Director General, of course, and the Director of the Division for Science Policy and Capacity Building. And we are very, very happy to see a lot of interest in open science in general, and also in this process of developing a UNESCO global standard setting instrument on open science. And I'll try to share my screen with you now. Here we go. Okay. I hope everybody can see it and can follow the slides. So just before diving into the process of the recommendation, because I have been asked to give you a little bit more details on the process of this UNESCO recommendation on open science, just wanted to give you a bit of a background as to why we are actually embarking into this process. And it really stems from the fact that, as a global community, we have the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, which are the Sustainable Development Agenda for the entire planet and for all the nations. And we do really see that science, technology, innovation is a very important part of driving this agenda, enabling this agenda, and making sure that we can actually implement the agenda in different countries. But to rise up to this potential of science in meeting the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, we really do need a little bit of a different science process that will enable a little bit more a process that is more efficient, transparent, that is more vibrant, that also responds to societal needs, and it also includes society in the way it functions. And of course, the open science movement really does bring together this notion of, democratization of science and the entire scientific process to really ensure, A, that we do have the knowledge which is needed to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, and also to make sure that the benefits of science really do go to each and every person in each and every country. Of course, as it was just said, COVID-19 also showed very, very clearly what are additional benefits of open science, and that is really in galvanizing knowledge and mobilizing knowledge at a global scale to be able to respond very quickly to some of the very urgent threats that we can face as humanity, basically, as shown in this particular crisis. When we talk about open science, we really do think about the entire scientific process. So it's not just in terms of, data or methods or analysis, publications. It really does, it's a movement that, if done correctly, actually will apply to all the different parts of the scientific enterprise, all the different parts of the scientific process. As we heard before, there are so many different elements of open science, and the scope of open science is actually very broad. There is, of course, open data, there is open access to publication, there is this part of open to society with citizen science, with science communication, and this broader dialogue between science and society. So Anna, open science, yes?
Can you speak a little bit up? Some of the discussion participants have difficulty hearing you.
Okay, I'm gonna shout a little bit more here. The idea is really that open science is science that is open between scientists, between disciplines, between countries. It allows for an increased scientific collaboration, but it's also science that is open to society. So we really kind of see it in those different terms. And of course, from the UNESCO perspective, what is really important for open science is that we can see it as a game changer in bridging the gaps that exist between developed and developing countries, and even within countries in terms of science, technology, and innovation. Because of course we are in the 21st century, but still we have huge gaps into science, technology, and innovation between the different countries and different regions. And we also see it as an important step towards fulfilling the human right to science, so the right to enjoy the benefits of science. So in this context, let's say, and knowing that even within UNESCO for a number of years, we have been working on different elements of open science, like open access or rather open access to data and journals. We see this movement that is building everywhere, and we see that it really kind of started from maybe the scientific community, but is now a movement that has gone much broader, and we have innovators, we have policymakers, entrepreneurs, citizens, of course, who want to join the movement and make open science a reality that works for all. So as we say, I mean, the question is no longer whether open science is happening, it's just that it is happening, and now the question is how do we make sure that everyone can contribute from it and benefit from the transition to open science. So as I said, it is a movement. There's a lot of things happening in different parts of the world, but for the moment we see a very fragmented policy environment, meaning that there are different directives and recommendations and initiatives at different levels. But globally, we actually do not have a standard, or we don't even have a global definition of what actually open science is, to make sure that we are actually all going in the same direction. And having acknowledged that and understood that, and taking into account the importance of open science for Sustainable Development Goals and for the benefit of society worldwide, the member states of UNESCO in November last year decided that they would task the organization with developing an international standard setting instrument on open science in the form of a UNESCO recommendation on open science. So what are UNESCO recommendations? The UNESCO recommendation is a legal instrument, right? So we have recommendations and we have conventions. These are the two legal instruments that the UNESCO can deliver. A recommendation is a way by which the General Conference, which is the governing body of the organization, formulates some principles and norms for the international regulation of a particular question, in this case, of course, open science, and invites the member states to take legislative or other steps to make sure that these norms and principles are actually applied in their countries. So it really is a tool to influence the development of national laws and practices, so at national level, to create norms at the international level and then kind of translate them into the national and then local levels. So this particular recommendation, as I said, the member states have decided to task the organization to develop it in November last year, with the aim of finalizing a text that would be actually adopted by member states at the next session of the UNESCO General Conference, which is in November 2021. It's a 2-year process, and the member states ask us very specifically that process needs to be consultative. It needs to take into account regional perspectives, different stakeholders' perspectives, different contexts in different regions, to really ensure that we capture the complexity of open science, opportunities, challenges, risks that may arise in different regions from transition to open science. The idea is that the recommendation would already give a definition of open science and the scope, and it will also define some shared values and principles for open science, and then propose some actions and recommendations for governments. As I said, the process it's a 2-year process, and the idea is that it's highly consultative. But we also have a science advisory committee that is multi-stakeholder and is supposed to guide the organization and the secretariat while going through the process. And in addition to that, we are working very hard to establish an open science partnership, which would really gather all the different actors at different levels who work on open science for the moment. So to make sure that we do bring all the voices of different stakeholders and from all the different regions. So this is a little bit the roadmap that has been decided by member states or adopted by member states in November. Things have shifted a little bit due to the current situation, because it was a bit difficult at a certain point to really stick to the roadmap, but we are still very much on track with regard to the entirety of the process. And I think the biggest change is that instead of having a lot of face-to-face consultations, which was our initial idea, a lot of the consultations are actually moving online. And we are getting better and better in actually having consultations and not just presentations in also this virtual context. So in a way, there is this first part until, let's say, September this year, where we really are trying to gather inputs from all the different stakeholders and from all the different countries. And then there is a second part where there will be a first draft of the actual text of the recommendation, which will be based on the inputs received from these consultations. And then another iteration of comments, which then from sometimes April next year really goes into the member states arena, and the member states then have to negotiate the final text to be submitted to the General Conference in November next year. So we have a tight deadline, but actually things are moving very nicely because the community is extremely vibrant, and I feel like since we've started, we have seen the need for such a global standard setting instrument by everybody. So we have really seen lots of interest in the recommendation and a lot of good willingness to ensure that the recommendation really is representative and does set this global set of principles and norms for the entire world. So the way we've proceeded with the consultations is that we have launched the global online consultation in March. We started before the COVID-19 crisis, but then we actually also included a few questions connecting open science and COVID-19, just to take advantage in a way and learn from this particular situation and what is the role of open science in that particular situation and what are the lessons that we can learn for future possible crises as well. So this global online consultation is going from March to, the deadline officially was the 15th of June. We are still receiving answers until the end of June, beginning of July. So if anybody still wants to provide inputs, you're more than welcome to do that. And at the same time, what was really, so for the moment we have some 3,000 entries already. As I said, it is from all the different regions. People have really, and institutions have taken it very seriously and sent very, very good inputs. And in addition to that, there is a series of international and regional organizations which actually gather different members and different institutions, like the International Science Council, the Inter-Academy Partnership, CODATA, COAR, Citizen Science Global Partnership. So we have a lot of different entities like that who decided to also provide written inputs on behalf of those bigger organizations. So they have done their internal consultations and they have forwarded to us some inputs. From some countries, we have also received some of these inputs as well, because they have also decided to do some national consultations just to provide inputs into the global and regional consultations. Now, on the regional consultation side, we will have this regional consultation from July to the beginning of October, more or less, in the different regions. This is for the moment the tentative timetable. For Europe and North America, because we combine the regions according to UNESCO's electoral group. So for Europe and North America, we will have the consultation in July. We actually have to move it because of the UNESCO Executive Board. So most probably it will happen sometimes around the 20th of July. We just have to fix the dates very quickly and then start inviting everybody. But for the moment, keep it in your heads. Around 20th of July, the regional consultation for North America and Europe. And these regional consultations, again, the idea is that they are multi-stakeholder. You have the representatives of all the different stakeholder groups, policy makers, but universities, academia, knowledge institutions, publishers, funders, the data community, open source, innovation people. What we've actually seen a lot during these past few months while we were working very closely on these issues is that the open science community is actually very fragmented. Like, yes, you have the open access, but they kind of don't necessarily always talk to others. So it's also important to bring them all together. We also have some thematic or stakeholders consultations, like the Global Young Academy is holding a consultation for the inputs to the UNESCO process tomorrow, actually, on the 25th of June. And we are very grateful to be working with the Global Young Academy because the youth perspective and the voices of young researchers are extremely important. And we do see a difference in what the challenges and opportunities are from the point of view of younger researchers and from the point of view of established researchers. It's different and it really needs to be reflected in the recommendation. Citizen science, we have to see how to gather those voices even more and get them to talk to each other about the role that they have in open science. Indigenous peoples, we were supposed to have a consultation on the margins of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Now we are trying to find another venue on virtual. how to get this input from indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge holders. With the UN system also, we have constant exchanges, so we're trying to see a little bit inputs from these different stakeholders group, etc. And then, as I said, there are some countries that are organizing either consultations or like the webinars, awareness raising campaigns, or other initiatives like that. So as I said, the first part is really gathering all these inputs. Then a draft recommendation, the first text has to be sent to member states based on all these inputs in September. And then from September on, there is another part where we gather input and comments on the actual draft text. In April, a second version goes to the member states, and from then on, it's really in the hands of member states and negotiations between member states. So I'm gonna stop here. I could, of course, continue, but I'm gonna stop here, and then I'm happy to answer any of the questions that you may have and provide any answers that I can. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. That was very helpful. And we will have a question from the audience immediately to you right now. But before, one question from me. So you have these regional consultations starting in July now with Western Europe and North America with stakeholders. So who is a stakeholder?
Well, stakeholders for us are really this broad range of actors that we've mapped out since the beginning of the process, who are particularly involved in open science practices, like, of course, the scientific community, who are impacted by it, which are the policymakers as well, of course, who shape it in a way. So it's people doing data, platforms, infrastructures, etc., digital platforms that can actually hold the open science as we intend it today. We have academies, as I said, we have knowledge societies, we have people from the different parts of the governments, because in different countries, the open science sits in very different places. So we're trying to understand who are all these different people who have to be involved. Of course, as I said, young researchers, they're a very important stakeholder in the process as well. Funders, that's another category. Publishers, we have to work with everybody because there really are a lot of citizen science organizations, as I said, indigenous peoples. There is a lot of different stakeholder groups that we want to engage in this conversation.
Thank you. So I think there's a question from Mrs. Habermann.
Ms. Habermann, the floor is yours.
Hi, sorry, I unmuted myself and then was unmuted by the conveners. Yeah, sorry to populate the chat so much. It's because I've been working with African researchers in particular, but also across the globe for open science and then open science kind of contexts and questions and initiatives, and also with indigenous communities. And I've attended the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues a couple of times. Back in 10 years ago, and I'm still in touch with the Youth Caucus. So if you need any connections or any kind of organizations that you can consult with, I'm very happy to convene that. And also in particular for Africa, I know that you've been in touch with Africa OSH, the Open Science Hardware Network. There's many other stakeholders that you're probably also in touch with one way or the other through EFL, Open Air. WACRAN, there's various research networks. So also here, if you need an overview, has access to perspectives. So I'm a trainer and consultant on open science communication based out of Berlin, but I work in a team of 20 plus science communication experts and open science experts from, well, almost across the world. It sounds big, but our team members are basically from Asia, Latin America, Europe, and Africa. So yeah, very happy to facilitate the process and to add input. One of my personal kind of hard issues in open science is language diversity, and obviously that's a topic also in Europe and Africa. And there's many feasible ways to convene for language diversity in science. So I'm very happy also to ideate on that in particular. Thanks very much.
Yes, indeed, and thank you very much. It would be good to share contacts maybe through the organizers and see where we can come together. In Africa, in particular, the scene is very dynamic, and open science means something a little bit different in Africa than it does in Europe. And like the open hardware or a couple of other entities, let's say, they're doing some really innovative ways of building knowledge or creating knowledge or collaborating that is very different from what we are used to, and really taking advantage of the new technologies, artificial intelligence, new technologies, 3D printings and other things. They're basically saying, we do have some of these things now, and we just have to make sure that the collaboration in this new digital era is such that it can also allow, use of some of these technologies. The African Open Science Platform is really now coming up as a federator of the different open science initiatives in Africa, and we are happy to support them, actually, work with them very closely. And of course, we have our field offices. So the UNESCO is based in Paris, but we have a network of field offices everywhere, and we actually are working very closely with them to gather the stakeholders from different regions to be able to gather the inputs for the recommendations as well. But all newcomers are very welcome to the project.
Thank you very much. In view of the time, I would like to give now the floor directly to Dick Bourgeois-Doyle. He stood up very early this morning because he transmits from Ottawa, and he's very early. It's 7 in the morning. So very warm welcome, and thank you for getting up so early for this webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Guten Tag in Deutschland. Danke dir für diese Präsentation in englischer Sprache. So, Dr. Muller, thank you. I'm obviously flattered. It's a compliment to be able to participate in this discussion, and of course to hear Ms. Persic speak about the status of things at UNESCO. For the participants, I'm invited to participate in this and speak in my capacity, I guess, as a former member of the Sectoral Commission, the Canadian Commission on UNESCO, and a co-author of a background paper that the Canadian Commission on UNESCO produced to support the Canadian discussions and try and coalesce our input into the UNESCO exercise that was just described to you. As I was listening, I remembered that we as Canadians actually spoke against the idea of UNESCO recommendation on open science, I think at the meeting in Paris, believing that the 2017 umbrella recommendation on science and scientific researchers needed to be a focus, and to to raise its profile. We would we advocated promoting the principles of open science that were embedded in that. But I only mention that now because I think we're converts, Anna. We now, having dragged our brain cells through the not just the importance of open science, the nuance of it. So I'm going to, of course, try and successfully share my screen here in order to speak. And I can speak without slides, but yeah, so I'm here in that capacity associated with UNESCO specifically, but your agenda, of course, also is directly related to the coronavirus and COVID-19's impact on the context for the discussions we're having about the UNESCO recommendation. And in that regard, I'm really reflecting in a personal way on my role as the chair of the advisory board of the EU's Path to Integrity project, which I would encourage everyone to Google and find out more about. It's actually based not too far from you, Dr. Muller, in Coburg, at the Coburg University. Got the EU funding to do that. And so when I speak, I will be within the frame of our paper with UNESCO, but some of my thinking on a personal base is going to reflect that Path to Integrity project and a spin-off called Trust in Science, which and I won't try and digress here, but Path to Integrity is an effort to teach research integrity and research ethics principles starting at the high school level throughout Europe. So from my perspective, and the message I would like to leave today correlated both with the COVID-19 experience, but it also resonates with our paper, is that I think that really the COVID experience really highlights the two sides of the issues that we would aspire to see in a UNESCO recommendation. One of is Anna very eloquently articulated, the really great benefits of more openness and sharing not just data and scientific information, but the collaboration that leads to what we hope will be vaccines and treatments and a whole bunch of other things that are directly related to the human experience of COVID-19. And of course, what we all hope to see is informed science-based and evidence-based policy from our leaders. And I don't know if, you know, I can't believe that it's just a North American bubble that I'm reflecting here, but it perversely has also provided fodder and fuel for the debates around misinformation and disinformation from people with agenda, and a concerted effort to undermine public trust in science, which is kind of a perverse thing when you consider how important science is to the COVID exercise. In regard to the first point that I made there, I think it's well known about the degree to which openness has been stimulated by the COVID context. Starting in January, when the Chinese shared the sequence of DNA, there was already almost like an instinctive release of previously paywalled papers and given access around the world. Before I ever knew of Dr. Fauci's association with the White House and other things, I remember reading an article quoting him in January where he was just inundated with information on coronavirus in general. And I know lots of journals started releasing it. It's continued, it's manifested not just in that kind of openness, but also there's more country-to-country collaborations. I know we're collaborating with the Chinese, particularly in vaccine development. So I don't think anybody would deny that, but also as the coronavirus has proved to be an avatar for the importance of open science to the successful assault on all the great challenges as the SDGs and others describe. But coming back to the public debates on science, there's conflicting information or seemingly conflicting information on requirements for masks, a lot of different things that have stimulated unfortunately, questions about the validity of science and information that's been shared. And we know that there are people with political agendas that are determined to confuse us and undermine our confidence in science. And this will, I believe, is directly relevant to the open science recommendation and the aspirations that are embedded in it. And as Anna again articulated, and as I will repeat later, the broad view of open science does embrace public communications, education, citizen science, and a greater effort to inform the public, not just about scientific inventions and the wonderful gadgets that will appear in the future tomorrow morning, but also what underpins it and how things work. So that's all to say that there is a challenge, but also a great opportunity in this process. And I think we are on the side of the angels in our exercise with UNESCO to develop a recommendation that would frame a more robust global effort on it. But again, the Canadian Commission on UNESCO, we prepared an open science paper. I was one of 4 authors. I should be able to quote the exact title, but if you Google Canadian Commission on UNESCO, for UNESCO, and go under resources, you'll easily find the paper there. So it's resources, that's where they put papers. And actually there's some coverage of it in different online publications that you might be able to find as well. Our paper did not, was drafted, as I said, specifically to try and provide informed context or background or reference, an easy reference for people that, like those of you participating in this webinar, who would look to contribute to the UNESCO recommendations, consultations. We wanted to actually not tell people what to think, but to inventory the issue from a Canadian perspective. As it happens, and maybe this is maybe predictable, maybe it might seem obvious to some of you that are listening to me, we did end up with a document that did reflect those two perspectives, the wonderful aspirational opportunities that more open science offers, but also the challenges and the need for some caution. And also our paper, which you all should peruse, has embedded in it specific Canadian perspectives and information. And everybody should learn more about Canada, so I guess that's a given. Our paper, yeah, so it reviews the status of open science in Canada, and there is, I think, certainly within the scientific community and the community that the Canadian communities that the Canadian Commission on UNESCO associates with, broad support for the more openness in science and all the reasons for that. We're not completely, we're not impaired, but in Canada we do have certain challenges in this environment. In that we have policies that are driven by the major funders of university and research. They've got their act together, university and medical institutions, on open science requirements. The federal government of Canada just within the last 6 months, I think, or maybe even more recently, issued a directive to its federal departments, such as the institution I was Secretary General of, to make sure that they had open science policies that resonated with some basic principles. But and then there's the private sector that has less exigence around that. So what I'm describing is there's a certain amount of fragmentation. So we have opportunities to improve and encourage coalescing of our, things aren't wildly divergent, but certainly when you want to encourage collaboration, you want to have a firm foundation that everybody can reference. And I think that the Canadian Commission, the recommendation of UNESCO on open science can provide that. And of course, our paper promotes openness to attack the grand challenges that are articulated in the SDGs, and climate, health, equality. And beyond that, it's not just sharing information or sharing data or sharing the latest research, but the collaboration and networking that openness precipitates. So But as I mentioned at the outset, we also recognize that, yeah, just saying that everything should be open access and freely available is one thing, but in this, I think we would advocate for the recommendation, the need for robust infrastructure to store data, to make sure that, in the word infrastructure, I'm not just talking about the hardware, but the institutional and the human infrastructure to maintain repositories that are consistent, can coordinate and communicate. And so that is just, I guess, the two sides, with my two-headed coronavirus on my opening slide of that yin and yang of wonderfulness of openness and to progress on it, but to do it in a coordinated way with recognition of all these other conditions or things that need to balance the process, and really embedded in that, and I actually should have said that much earlier, but maybe I will in a second here with another slide, is the desire to not lose what we have in the current paradigm of the peer review process and the quality, not only of the science, but the quality of the distribution of science with professional. I know we, at the root of this is the pricing of subscriptions to journals and the paywalls that have hindered open science, but that money in large part converts into quality editing, distribution, access that is the other side of the coin. So want to maintain the quality of what we have, but and yet make things more freely available. We've all seen the rise of predatory publishers, and confusion, and preprint prints are great in certain contexts, but they do provide they do instill some confusion that mitigates against our effort to get more confidence in the public and science. Also, there's an excerpt from our paper at the right-hand side of the slide there: cost, ethics, privacy, confidentiality, commercialization, safety, and security. I mean, these are all things that are to be considered in moving ahead on an open science agenda. In commercialization, there are certain, actually, probably my organization's exemplary of this, many cases where the best path to producing human benefit from a technology is through a robust commercialization avenue, which does require some types of protection of information and secrecy. And I guess the core consideration in ethics, and that would be the hesitation to make everything open if it includes personal information and our data. And national security issues around some science where you don't want certain actors to have access to certain kinds of research. These are just considerations. The Canadian concern, or the flavor of, everything I said here, I probably could be said by anybody. It wouldn't be a particularly Canadian thing, but and I'm sure there are other countries that share this particular issue, but we have a lot of published journals that are threatened right now by the pressure for open access. Their viability has been threatened just by the whole trend that everybody wants everything for free, and they are stumbling along now with a hybrid of author pay and some, and I think they have total open science journals, some with different rules, and that's a kind of hodgepodge. But these are, what I'm talking about is journals that are produced by learned societies or nonprofits such as Canadian Science Publishing, which is got a really impressive portfolio of well-respected journals. The problem with if we were to lose these journals, and people could say, well, there'd be other platforms that can disseminate the information and the research. These journals are very much a cornerstone of scientific communities. And I see the Canadian Journal of Microbiology there. It's a venue for people in the Canadian microbiology community to not only network, but to develop the next generation of researchers who, volunteer as reviewers, eventually editors, and they have an avenue to, see a vision for their own sectors. And it's something that we see as threatened by a wholesale, unfettered move to open science. So I guess, again, this is another effort to advocate for a UNESCO recommendation that sees some need for care to maintain what we've got. And I mentioned these other considerations in passing another one, so I'll save you that slide. Just before I close, though, a particular feature of our paper is the involvement of the Youth Advisory Council, or they call them the Youth Advisory Group of the Canadian Commission and UNESCO. I'm told that we have, if not the biggest, one of the biggest, like 30 young people, I think 20 to 30, they're all humbling in their achievements and completely enthusiastic. One of our co-authors was Ella Chan, University of British Columbia student, and they had actually, I thought that their generation would be, and it wasn't just Ella, she was the vehicle for input from a lot of the Youth Advisory Board members. One of our co-authors, unfortunately, was killed in the Iranian plane crash in January, partway through our paper. So I kind of shook the group up, but they did come together with coherent inputs that you would recognize if you read our paper. And again, I suspected they would be, cheerleaders for unfettered open access, but I was touched by the fact that they did recognize the merits in the things I was saying about that other side as well. But a particular quote from Ella, our author, when she was interviewed, was our concept of open science goes far beyond access to journals and data, which is probably what my comments focused on, but it can include the movement to involve more non-expert citizens in scientific process, the use of social media, and the range of science communication activities. And I noted that Anna did include those concepts when she talked about citizen science and communications. And the comment, I believe, is more profound than some people might see it, because putting a journal out on the web is kind of impotent without an amplifying effort to communicate it, particularly if we're talking about using open science to touch and engage a larger public. It can't just be done that way. You can't just throw your paper out the window and say now it's free to the world. You have to buttress it with efforts to try and explain, engage, and share. So now, and Ella is I guess a kind of a YouTube star. So her association with our paper manifested in more social media attention than I'm used to. So it was very helpful. So the bottom line, open science is great. We are enthusiasts for UNESCO in general, but we are now converts, and their converts are rapid. So enthusiasts for the open science recommendation. But when we consult and when we talk to others, it's important, we feel, to say there's a cost to openness, to producing open science that is not just a quality but useful, and make it really truly accessible. I'm sure that the scientists on the line will know the ability to be able to search and exchange data in particular. But and this is now coming back to my association with the Path to Integrity Project. Well, our endeavor with the Path to Integrity project, so a EU effort, was thinking in terms of training scientists or young scientists and future scientists on the importance of scientific integrity and the embedded ethics in that. But what we realized in our Trust in Science side project in the COVID context is that as you share information with the general public on what the scientific the integrity requirements of the scientific process are, you instill more confidence in science and more public confidence, and that leads to policies based on quality science and a confluence with the public support for science, which leads us to Nirvana. So thanks very much. I hope I didn't have time in front of me, Dr. Mueller. I hope I didn't abuse it too much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dick Bourgeois-Doyle. Can you close your presentation?
Yeah.
And then we come to a very quick final round of discussion. There have been only a few open questions from the audience. Maybe one or two are still coming in. But before we come to the questions from the audience, a very short response from my part. So this presentation of the German Commission for UNESCO is something that came out 2 weeks ago. And, you know, we spoke about that. We've actually built and profited from your publication that you have come out in April. So we translated part of it, adapted it to German context. So it was also for us a very helpful exercise in working openly based on Creative Commons and really trying to benefit as much as possible in an international context. So thanks very much for your publication. And I would only have one short follow-up question. You mentioned the commercialization and the IP mostly as a boundary problem for open science, for what conflicts are emerging. So we have a very intensive discussion here in Germany about open innovation. It will also be a topic of one of our webinars. Do you think that this conflict with IP, with commercialization, could be productively addressed in the conflict of open science, or from your point of view, is that overstretching open science?
If I understand your question correctly, you think that commercialization and management of intellectual property could be bolstered by open science and open innovation and more collaboration across from companies and that. So yeah, I think we now my mind goes around to the various organizations that have the privilege of being associated with me, but the National Research Council would certainly agree wholeheartedly with that possibility, and we are aggressively pursuing an agenda with more consortia and collaborations and sharing in that way. My only point, though, I would want to table is there are circumstances and there are points where you get to where, if you're going to see the societal impact that comes from successful commercialization, there is a certain argument in favor of some protection of scientific information. But I don't think that's inconsistent. You know, like maybe it's on a continuum. At certain points, you move in. Well, you know, you get closer to applied, you can protect information wholeheartedly. But the yeah, specifically what we have in mind was the kind of point where you want to protect information because that's going to be the cornerstone for how you move forward and make a product or service that's going to serve the world and make you money.
I have a question from the audience to, I think mainly to Anna Persic. How can interested individuals get involved in this important political discussion? So I would interpret it also beyond the current consultation that is still ongoing during July, because you mentioned that. So is there an opportunity for interested individuals to contribute also in the further stages of the development of the recommendation? And the second question in that context is how to make sure the voice of the early career researchers and their community gets heard beyond the global young academy.
Yeah, these are great questions. In terms of engaging with the process beyond the consultations, well, let's say that the consultations are the first step. And then we see what is this community of open science that is going to be community of practice in a way that is going to be created also through this process of consultations. Like with any other engagement from the scientific community in these policy processes, there are so many different ways, and there is not, there are no, rules. It also depends on the national context where you are. It depends on the institutions where you're at. It depends on how engaged the institution is in some of the national processes, policy processes, etc. Everybody can also, contact national commissions, which are there for UNESCO, which are there precisely to make this connection between what UNESCO is doing and what is happening nationally. The Canadian Commission, the UNESCO Youth, for example, is also a very good example of how youth can be involved in certain issues. But really, I think for us, what is going to be, for the moment, we kind of try to concentrate on the consultations process and then building this open science community. One thing that is very important is that the recommendation and the process to develop recommendation is important, and it is going to be extremely important to come up with a recommendation that fits everybody. The even more important part is how do you implement that recommendation on the national level, right? So in that second part, this is where I think also particularly the youth perspectives are going to be extremely important. How do you make sure within your institutions, throughout the different types of engagements you can have, you move this agenda forward?
Thank you very much. Still have not seen any additional follow-up question from the chat. Then one question from myself. You also mentioned, of course, the important dimension of international cooperation, specifically to strengthen also science and scientific research in the Global South. So would you say that from the perspective of UNESCO, as far as it has coalesced so far, is the opening of science towards the Global South or the North-South dimension, is that itself part of open science, or does open science help to build these better bridges, or is that part of the discourse itself? I'm not sure whether you understand me.
No, I understand. I mean, definitely from our point of view, open science is an additional mechanism or tool to strengthen the collaboration between the South and the North. And I think when we talked to our colleagues in Africa, and when we held already those discussions on the continent, because we actually had a couple of consultations even in December last year, right after the decision was adopted, with the African Union and African Open Science Platform colleagues. What they're saying is that open science really is a way to strengthen the international collaboration and make it more just in a way. Because still, with opening scientific data, very often, for example, the publications are done and are then done in the North with the data from the South. So I think and this is what our colleagues in developing countries are a little bit concerned with. This is their concern. They have to make sure, and they want to ensure that open science is not a way of facilitating getting the data from the South for some other purposes, and just really making sure that it is shared data and that they can work together with particularly colleagues in the developed countries. So for them, really open collaborations, there are certain principles of open collaboration that they're very, very specific on. And I think that's something that is going to be very interesting to see also how it resonates with other partners from the North as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. To the two panelists, to Anna and Dick Bourgeois-Doyle, do you have any questions or comments related to each other? Do you want to comment on each other? Is there still something that you would like to add? Because we're already 10 minutes over time, so I would like to round up, but I would like to give you the last opportunity to say something in closing.
No, I mean, from my side, I'm very happy that the Canadian Commission for UNESCO took this initiative to do the paper. And we actually did go through the paper while also gathering other information. So it's very useful. And it has been the first one that actually kind of set the example for the other countries. And I think that's also one of the interesting parts of doing these consultations, is that we really constantly learn from each other and can exchange. And eventually, the idea is really to build some kind of, platform for exchanging lessons and building on the practices already from one country and trying to see how that would fit in another country. So this is just a nice example of how that can happen very concretely and very quickly, actually.
Well, on behalf of Sebastian and his gang, I'll thank you for that kind comment, Anna. And just tersely, I appreciated your presentation. So now I know where clearly where it fits in and where the process sits. And again, I'm flattered, Dr. Miller, Denise, Nadine, to participate.
Well, thank you very much. Then before closing, I would just respond to one remark which came from the chat, whether the presentations would also be uploaded as open material to a repository. And we have not discussed that frankly with the presenters before, so we have to clarify that, because if somebody does some presentations, then sometimes copyrighted materials and copyrighted graphics are in there. So we will try to discuss it with the panelists afterwards, but this is only something that I cannot give a definite answer to, but we will clarify that for the follow-up webinars beforehand. So to all of the people who have stayed with us until the end of this webinar, we were around 40 people in this meeting, and we will stream, put it onto YouTube afterwards. So I think that was very interesting, very insightful start of our webinar series, and it gave us a good overview of where UNESCO is heading with the draft recommendation. And I think also the Canadian perspective that also got our discussion in Germany here really going was very helpful. And I thank you also for the great interest of our Ministry for Education and Research, for the BMBF, for being very supportive in this process. And I'm really looking forward that with this legal text that UNESCO will be producing in 2021, we will really getting a boost for open science globally, and specifically in those countries which need it the most. And I think really also what the Canadian perspective is, we really also have to address this entire discourse of fake news and lack in trust in science. I think that I agree with you that this is also something that we have to focus on. It is not a scientific discussion by itself, but I think open science has this great trust also from the scientific community, because it was triggered from within the scientific community. Anna Persic has mentioned that also in her slides. So with that, I would like to close this this webinar. Thank all of the audience for staying with us 15 minutes longer than originally foreseen. And I wish all of you a sunny summer day, and please follow this process and participate in all of the consultations that are open for that. And we will put all of the links and all of the material on the website of www.unesco.de. And thanks to my colleagues who have been also key in hosting this meeting. And goodbye to everybody.
Bye, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Tschüss, vielen Dank.
Sehr gerne.